The Abandoned Promise Content Warning. This story contains detailed descriptions of a murder, domestic violence, and infidelity. It is intended for viewers 18 years and older. The names of all individuals involved have been changed to protect identities. The events described are based on a real case, but have been adapted for narrative purposes. Legal disclaimer: the following content is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice or encourage any illegal activities. The views expressed by Detective Shernan are his own and do not necessarily reflect those of law enforcement agencies or the justice system. Detective Shernan's case file. I've always believed that the quieter the place, the louder secrets echo. That's why, when I arrived at Muyang Farm in Suin County, a peaceful rural community that had never witnessed a murder in its recorded history, I knew I was walking into more than just a crime scene. I was entering a web of secrets that had finally snapped under their own weight. My name is Detective Shernan. I specialize in cold cases and complex homicides that others have given up on. But this one was still fresh, the blood barely dry on the bedroom walls. What made it particularly unsettling was how out of place it seemed in this tranquil farming community, where everyone knew each other by name, where doors were often left unlocked, and where the most serious crimes typically involved petty theft or minor property disputes. On May 13, 2012, at dawn, the body of Thomas Reed, a 48-year-old security officer for the local farming community, was discovered in his own home. What was supposed to be a place of safety had become the stage for his violent end. The murder scene was chaotic, almost theatrical, which immediately struck me as peculiar. I like to say that murder scenes tell stories, sometimes too many at once. This one was practically screaming. When I first stepped into Reed's home, the disarray was overwhelming. The bedroom walls were splattered with blood on 3 sides. Between the bed and the wall, Reed's body lay wedged in an unnatural position, as if he had struggled to escape before death claimed him. What would you do if you woke up to someone attacking you in your own bed? I whispered to myself, trying to imagine Reed's final moments. In the living room, 2 small bloodstains marked the sofa, along with a men's dress shirt with smeared blood. A woman's handbag sat nearby, zipper undone, contents seemingly disturbed. A mop stood awkwardly placed at the entrance, clearly moved and positioned in a way that made no practical sense. 8 different sets of footprints crossed the living room floor in various directions. One distinct bloody footprint stood out in the bedroom. The front door lock remained intact. All windows were secured with steel mesh, except for the bathroom window, where the mesh had been broken. I learned this was how the neighbors had entered that morning after Reed's wife, Sarah, had discovered something was wrong. If this house could talk, I said to my partner as we surveyed the scene, I'm not sure we'd like what it had to tell us. The morning after 8 people had entered the crime scene before police arrived, an unusual circumstance that immediately complicated the investigation. When a neighborhood discovers a potential crime, most people's first instinct is to call authorities, not to break in and possibly contaminate evidence. I sat across from Sarah Reed in the interview room. She was a composed woman in her mid-40s, her eyes reed-rimmed but dry. Her story came out steadily, almost rehearsed. I was at my brother's house that night, she explained. I went to visit him, and around 10:00 p.m., I tried to return home, but realized I'd forgotten my keys. I knocked, but Thomas's washart of hearing, especially after he'd been drinking. I assumed he was already asleep and didn't hear me, so I went back to my brother's for the night. I watched her carefully, and then what happened? Around 5 a.m., I got a call from Maria, our household helper. She told me to come home immediately because Thomas was injured. Sarah's voice wavered slightly. When I got there, I still couldn't open the door. The sun was coming up by then, and when I looked through the window, I saw bloodstains on the bed. I was terrified. I called the neighbors for help right away. "Did you notice anything unusual about your husband's behavior in the days before his death?" I asked. "No," she said, perhaps too quickly. Everything was normal. One of the neighbors who had entered the house that morning told a slightly different story. "We were all in a panic," he recalled. Sarah was beside herself. "We broke through the bathroom window because we thought we might be able to save Thomas if we got in quickly enough. None of us were thinking about preserving a crime scene. We just wanted to help our friend." I nodded sympathetically, but that explanation didn't completely satisfy me. 8 people trampling through a potential murder scene before authorities arrived was suspicious, regardless of their intentions. The victim, Thomas Reed, was more than just another victim on my case list. He was a complex man with a complicated history. The Reed family home was located in a high-end residential area within Muyang Farm. Thomas had leased over 250 acres of land and was financially successful. As a security officer for the farm's brigade, he was responsible for assisting law enforcement in maintaining local order. His household consisted of 3 people: himself, his wife Sarah, and their 19-year-old daughter Lily, who was away at school preparing for her final exams. She was an aspiring artist who had already been accepted to 2 prestigious art universities in Beijing. "The daughter doesn't know yet," my partner informed me quietly as we stood outside the Reed home. "She's less than a month away from her college entrance exam, and they're afraid telling her might derail everything." I closed my eyes briefly, imagining the girl's world about to shatter. "Someone needs to tell her soon," I said. "This isn't something that can wait." When I spoke with Deputy Director Sun, who was leading the local investigation, I learned something that changed my understanding of Thomas Reed. "Reed and I were classmates in high school," Sun told me, his expression grim. "Back then, everyone knew him as a gang leader. He wasn't particularly big or strong, but he was ruthless, cunning. He'd fight anyone without hesitation." "What changed him?" I asked. "In our senior year, 1983, one of his gang members stabbed another student during a fight. The kid nearly died. The attacker went to prison. After that, Thomas seemed different, quieter. When he came back to work on the farm after graduation, he seemed like a completely different person, hard-working, humble. He married Sarah in 1990, and they built quite a life together. I've seen this pattern before, youthful violence giving way to a stable adulthood. But in my experience, people don't change completely. They evolve, adapt, suppress, but core aspects of personality rarely disappear entirely. I wondered what parts of the young gang leader still lived inside the adult Thomas Reed and how those aspects might have contributed to his death. The crime scene speaks. The forensic team worked methodically, documenting every blood spatter and fingerprint. I stood in Reed's bedroom, trying to reconstruct what had happened based on the evidence before me. The blood patterns told a chilling story. The perpetrator had struck Reed's head with a bladed weapon, likely an axe, with tremendous force. As the weapon became bloodied, the assailant lifted it swiftly, causing blood to splatter onto the eastern wall, then the ceiling, before finally landing on the southern wall. According to the forensic report, Reed had suffered only 2 wounds to the head. One measured about 4 inches long and the other about 3. 5 inches. Both were deep, penetrating into the brain tissue. The killer struck with extreme force, the medical examiner told me. This wasn't a panicked assault or a defensive reaction. There was rage behind these blows, focused, intentional rage. The most disturbing revelation was that Reed likely hadn't died instantly. The bloodstains showed a clear pattern of movement. After sustaining the traumatic brain injury, he had still been mobile for a short time, leaving small pools of blood with each shift of his head, marking his painful journey across the sheets, until he finally rolled over and became trapped in the narrow space between the southern window and the bed. So he was still alive, struggling, while the killer was in his house, I said, feeling a cold anger rise in my chest. And whoever did this, just let him suffer. I've investigated hundreds of homicides over my career, but the calculated cruelty of this one, allowing the victim to slowly die rather than ensuring a quick end, suggested a particularly cold-blooded perpetrator. The timing of the murder was established between 9:00 p.m. and 10:00 p.m. on May 12th, the night before the body was discovered. As for the motive, several possibilities emerged. Sarah Reed reported that approximately $1,500 in cash was missing from the house. The handbag had been rummaged through, and the wardrobe had clearly been opened. This initially pointed to a robbery gone wrong, but something didn't fit. If someone came here just to steal, why bring an axe? I asked aloud, though no one was there to answer. That's not a thief's weapon. That's a killer's tool. Furthermore, while the handbag and wardrobe showed signs of disturbance, the cash and jewelry inside the drawers remained untouched, inconsistent with a typical robbery. I walked slowly around the living room, studying the scene. No forced entry at the doors or windows, I noted. The killer either had a key or was let in by Reed himself. The evidence was pointing toward a disturbing conclusion. This was not a random act of violence or a burglary gone wrong. This was personal. The murderer knew Thomas Reed and almost certainly had been welcomed into his home. The drinking companions. The investigation quickly turned to the last people known to have seen Reed alive. His 3 drinking companions who had gathered at his home on the evening of May the 12th. All 3 were among the 8 individuals who had entered the crime scene the next morning before police arrived, a coincidence that immediately raised my suspicions. The first was Charles Fuller, a 39-year-old neighbor who served as secretary of the neighboring farm team. The second was Edward Hill, a 60-year-old farmer who had leased a large amount of land in the area. The third was George Chen, Reed's longtime friend and the farm team's accountant. I'd like you to imagine yourself in Reed's position that night, I said to Fuller during our first interview. You're having drinks with friends. Everything seems normal. Yet within hours, you'll be dead. What might you have noticed if you were in his shoes? Did anyone seem tense, angry, unusual in any way? Fuller shook his head. It was just a normal get-together. We do it all the time. He described how they had started drinking around 6:00 p.m. When I walked into the house, Thomas and George were already there. The 3 of us were about to have dinner when Thomas noticed Edward walking by. He invited him to join us, so that made 4. "What time did you leave?" I asked. "Around 8:30 p.m. I went to visit another friend after that and stayed until about 10:30 p.m. I moved on to Hill." When I questioned him about his relationship with Reed, he mentioned that Reed had discussed potential business ventures with him, specifically about investing in seafood. However, Hill denied having any actual business partnership with him. "Did Reed ever advance you any money for this venture?" I asked. "No, absolutely not," Hill said firmly. "We just talked about possibilities, that's all." I made a mental note to investigate further. If Reed had indeed invested money with Hill, his death could potentially leave that as an unclaimed debtor a possible motive. Hill stated that he was the first to leave Reed's house that night around 7:30 p.m. He then went to the town square to pick up his granddaughter and later visited his daughter's house. Several witnesses confirmed his whereabouts during this time. Of the 3 drinking companions, George Chen drew my most intense scrutiny. He had known Reed the longest, more than 20 years, and worked closely with him, handling finances for their farm team while Reed managed security. On the morning of the murder, Reed personally went to find you in the fields, I noted, watching Chen's expression carefully. "You were plowing rice paddies, but you abandoned your work to go drinking with him. Why?" Chen shrugged. "Thomas was my friend. When he asked, I went. It's as simple as that." According to Sarah Reed, you and her husband spent most of that day lying on the sofa drinking from morning until night. That's a lot of drinking, even for close friends. Chen's eyes didn't meet mine. We were celebrating. Celebrating what? Just life. Nothing specific. Most importantly, Chen was the last person to leave Reed's house that night. Fuller and Hill had both left earlier, leaving only Chen and Reed behind. No one knew what happened after that. Chen insisted that he returned home at around 9 p.m. To verify this, we calculated the distance from Reed's house to Chen's home. Even at the fastest pace, it would take at least 15 minutes to walk there. If Chen's statement was true and he arrived home at 9 p.m., that meant he must have left Reed's house around 8:40 p.m. However, forensic analysis determined the time of the murder to be between 9 and 10 p.m. This timing seemed to clear Chen of direct involvement. Chen's wife initially corroborated his alibi, stating that when he arrived home that night, they watched a TV program called Love Gone Wrong together. She even recalled a specific scene where the male lead was apologizing to someone. Upon verification, we confirmed that on the night of May 12th, the television network did indeed air that show, and the scene she mentioned occurred around 9:10 p.m. But something in her demeanor struck me as odd, hesitant, nervous. When pressed, she admitted to lying initially, not because her husband was guilty, but out of fear of being linked to a murder case, fear that their drinking that night would become an issue, and worry that inconsistencies in their statements could cause trouble. "Mrs. Chen," I said gently, "you understand that lying to police in a murder investigation is itself a serious offense. If your husband is innocent, the truth can only help him." What really cleared Chen of immediate suspicion, however, was a simple observation. He hadn't changed his clothes from the night before. After thorough examination, no traces of blood were found on his clothing, making it highly unlikely he had wielded the murder weapon. The secret affairs. By the 3rd day of the investigation, we had uncovered another layer to Thomas Reed's life, one that his public persona had carefully concealed. Around 1998 to 1999, Reed had an extramarital affair with a woman named Anna, a laborer from a neighboring town who came to work at the farm. As a security officer responsible for managing and issuing permits to non-local workers, Reed took special care of Anna, often helping her with various difficulties. Over time, they grew close, and their relationship evolved into an affair. This liaison lasted for several years before it was discovered by Anna's husband, Mark. After a confrontation, Anna and Mark left Muyang Farm. Before their departure, Mark had allegedly warned Reed, "This isn't over. I won't let this go." After uncovering this lead, we considered this a significant conflict and potential motive. However, we discovered that Anna and her husband had eventually moved away from the region entirely, and their current whereabouts were unknown. But Anna wasn't Reed's only indiscretion. About 3 years after she left, Reed became involved with another woman, Brenda, a local who had once been on the same team as him. Her husband, David, was known for being gentle and honest, according to locals, a man who was easy to take advantage of. Seeking protection and possibly excitement, Brenda had become involved with Reed. Although no one spoke openly about it, it was evident that David resented Reed deeply. Shortly afterward, Brenda's family moved away from the team. She went to work in southern China and hadn't returned for over 2 years, leaving only David and their son at home. A husband ignoring his wife's affair is highly unusual, I told my partner. David should definitely be on our list of suspects. We tracked David down and questioned him about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He claimed he was home alone all night with no one to confirm his alibi. His son had worked the night shift and never returned home that night. However, we soon found neighbors who reported seeing David return home around 6 p.m. on May 12th. They had played cards together late into the night and never saw him leave the house. Based on this testimony, we were able to rule him out as a suspect. I sat at my desk late that night, reviewing what we knew. Thomas Reed had projected an image of a respectable family man and community leader, but beneath that facade lay a pattern of extramarital affairs that had created enemies. Yet none of these enemies appeared to have had the opportunity to commit the murder. "What are we missing?" I muttered to myself, staring at the crime scene photos spread across my desk. What aren't we seeing? The hidden will. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected direction. While examining Reed's belongings, investigators discovered over 10 IOU notes and loan agreements written by various individuals who had borrowed money from him. Given his wealth, many people had turned to Reed for loans. The most recent note was dated May 11th, just 1 day before the murder. A person named Jerry King had borrowed $15,000. Almost simultaneously, we found another document inside a woman's handbag in Reed's house. It was a will written by Sarah Reed, dated December 23rd, 2011, approximately 5 months before the murder. "If anything happens to me or Thomas, all of our assets will belong to our child and will be managed by her aunt. No one else has the right to take them. All the money and property in our home will be under her aunt's control until she grows up and can receive them herself." The will raised immediate questions. Both Sarah and Thomas had been in good health when it was written. Why would Sarah suddenly draft a will? Did she anticipate something terrible happening to their family? Or was there another secret between her and her husband? People don't write wills like this unless they're afraid of something specific. I told my team. This doesn't say, if I die naturally, or when we grow old. It says, if anything happens to me or Thomas. She was anticipating violence. The perfect marriage. Our investigation took a new direction, focusing on the Reed marriage itself. On the surface, Thomas and Sarah appeared to have a strong relationship. Reed had always treated his in-laws well. He had helped move Sarah's parents, sister, and younger brother from another farm to Muyang Farm, supporting them financially and physically to start farming and improve their quality of life. Moreover, Sarah treated Reed's relatives well. Though Reed was the most financially successful of his 4 siblings, he was not particularly generous with them. It was always Sarah who took the initiative to buy gifts and supplies for holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings. As for Reed's affairs with the 2 other women, Sarah seemed completely unaware. No one had ever seen her argue with him over these matters, which struck me as peculiar, given that in small farming communities, gossip travels quickly. Have you ever watched a play where the actors are saying one thing, but their body language is telling you something completely different? I asked my partner. That's what this marriage looks like to me. A performance for public consumption. We discreetly approached Sarah's younger sister for insight. What she revealed changed the trajectory of our investigation. While my brother-in-law did treat our family well, his relationship with Sarah was not as perfect as it appeared, she confided. In reality, Sarah had known about his extramarital affairs for a long time. She explained that her sister had a strong personality, the type who would swallow her broken teeth rather than spit them out. Sarah rarely shared details about her marriage with their family, preferring to maintain appearances. If you suspected there were problems in their marriage, why didn't you say something sooner? I asked her. She looked away. Family loyalty. And I wasn't sure. Not enough to accuse anyone of murder. When we questioned Sarah again about their marriage, she finally opened up. Thomas was responsible and hard-working when we first got married. Life was good until one night. She paused, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly. I saw him inside another woman's house. A few minutes later, all the lights in that house were turned off. I knocked on the door. Eventually, the woman's husband came out, quickly pulled me aside and sent me home. What did you do then? I asked. Nothing. I didn't argue with Thomas, didn't cause a scene, but from that day on, our relationship began to fracture and grew colder. She continued, there was a time when I was bedridden for 7 days due to illness. Every morning, he would wake up and head to one of our 3 small convenience stores to play mahjong. He played all day, ate there, and only returned home at 10 p.m. I lay in bed the entire time. For 7 days, he never once asked how I was doing. When discussing the beginning of her relationship with Reed and how it later deteriorated, Sarah spoke openly. However, when asked about the will, she became evasive, changing the subject. She simply stated that she had written it for fun. Mrs. Reed, I said firmly, in my 25 years of law enforcement, I've never known anyone to write a will for fun. Wills are serious documents that people create when they're thinking about mortality, their own or someone else's. She didn't respond, and I didn't push further. At that moment, I knew we needed to investigate Sarah's personal connections more closely. The mysterious caller. By analyzing Sarah's phone records, we discovered that she had been in frequent contact with an unknown number. More importantly, on the very day of the murder, Sarah had called this number 12 times. Strangely, immediately after the murder, all communication between Sarah and this mystery caller abruptly stopped. What are the odds, I asked myself, that someone makes 12 calls to the same number on the day their spouse is murdered and then never calls that number again? We traced the number to a man named Oliver Yang, a businessman from another city. As we dug deeper into his background and movements, the pieces began to fall into place. On May 17, 2012, the fifth day after the crime was reported, Oliver Yang was apprehended. During transport back to the station, he confessed that he was the one who had killed Thomas Reed. He claimed he had done it for Sarah. The love affair. In 2009, Oliver Yang, a businessman from Bay Datang, arrived at the farm to purchase grain. He was new to the area and unfamiliar with anyone. After buying grain from Sarah's household, they became acquainted. Yang asked Sarah to help him connect with other farmers to buy another truckload of grain, offering to pay her for her assistance. Their initial relationship was purely transactional, not romantic. But over time, things changed. Yang took great care of Sarah, reminding her to dress warmly in the winter and to wear a mask to protect herself from the cold. Around that time, Sarah had discovered her husband's affair. Compared to Thomas, Oliver seemed more thoughtful and attentive. Yang had already been divorced by then, and he developed feelings for Sarah. The two quickly fell into an affair. Have you ever been so lonely inside a marriage that the kindness of a stranger feels like rain in a desert? Sarah asked me during her final interview. Her eyes were dry now, resigned. That's what Oliver was to me. Rain in a desert. Yang frequently visited the farm to see Sarah, except during major holidays like Chinese New Year. They spent almost every other holiday together. Sarah received flowers and gifts, something Reed had never given her. When they couldn't meet in person, they talked on the phone for at least 4 hours a day. Meanwhile, her marriage with Reed had completely deteriorated. Because of their daughter, they continued living together, but only in name. The previous autumn, just months before the murder, Sarah had asked Reed for a divorce, but he refused. According to Sarah, he made his stance clear. You will never leave this house. Even in death, we'll die together. At that moment, Sarah lost all hope. From then on, they maintained a facade of harmony while their relationship grew colder. Sarah stopped mentioning divorce, but inside, her resentment festered. She felt trapdownable to continue her life, unable to leave. Sarah and Oliver reached a chilling conclusion. If Reed wasn't eliminated, they would never be free. The murder plan. Once the decision was made, Yang began to devise a plan. He searched the internet for ways to commit murder, starting with lethal food combinations. When Yang found a claim that eating shrimp with tomatoes could be deadly, he immediately told Sarah. She decided to try it, planning for both herself and Reed to eat the dish together. However, after dinner, they sat watching TV and nothing happened. 2 hours passed and still there were no effects. The will Sarah wrote was dated the same day she attempted the shrimp poisoning. Reed slept soundly that night, proving that the attempted poisoning had failed. Later, we confirmed that the so-called toxic food combinations were nothing more than urban myths. But by then, the murderous intent had already taken root. Sarah didn't stop after that failure. She knew Reed was hard of hearing and that he slept deeply after drinking. That was the perfect time to try again. On the night of May 12th, Reed drank with his 3 friends. Sarah had already informed Yang in advance. By 9 p.m., everyone had left. Sarah called Yang, left the door unlocked for him, and then went to her brother's house, creating her alibi. When Yang entered, Reed was fast asleep. Holding an axe, he struck and killed Thomas Reed. Then, following their plan, he took money from the handbag on the sofa to stage the scene as a robbery. He even used a mop to wipe down his path, erasing all footprints before placing the mop by the entrance and leaving. The next morning, Sarah deliberately called in 7 neighbors to enter the crime scene with her. First, they could serve as witnesses for her alibi, and second, the presence of many people would disrupt the crime scene, making investigation more difficult. If you were in Sarah's position, I asked my partner, as we prepared the final report, trapped in a loveless marriage with a controlling husband who refused divorce, what would you have done? My partner thought for a moment. Left anyway. Sought legal help. Anything but murder. That's the tragedy here, I said. She saw only 2 options: stay forever or kill him. She couldn't see all the paths in between. The aftermath. During the trial, the court ruled that Oliver Yang was the direct perpetrator of the murder. His actions demonstrated extreme cruelty and a firm intent to kill with no significant mitigating factors. He was sentenced to death. Sarah Reed, although she did not personally carry out the killing, was determined to be the mastermind. She planned, instigated, and facilitated Yang's crime. She also attempted to cover it up, obstructing the investigation. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison. 10 days before her college entrance exam, Lily Reed requested to see her mother. The police allowed them to speak over the phone. From prison, Sarah told her daughter to listen to her family and expressed deep regret and sorrow for what she had done. Despite her grief, the daughter comforted and reassured her mother, promising to live well. It was a brief conversation, yet it carried the weight of a mother's remorse and a child's pain and maturity in the face of tragedy. I've seen many victims in my career, not just those who die, but those left behind to pick up the pieces. Lily Reed, suddenly without both parents, facing her exams and her future alone, struck me as perhaps the most tragic victim of all in this case. The moral of the story. In my years as a detective, I've learned that murder is rarely a sudden impulse. It's typically the culmination of a long chain of events, decisions, and emotions, a slow-motion avalanche that eventually becomes unstoppable. Among all the murder cases I've investigated, crimes committed by acquaintances account for approximately 70 of all cases. Of those, nearly half stem from marital and romantic conflicts. There's an old saying, a day is husband and wife, a lifetime of loyalty. In this case, Sarah claimed that she had asked for a divorce, but her husband refused and threatened her. However, if they had gone to court, a judge would have made a ruling based on the circumstances. But she never attempted that legal route. She chose an extreme solution instead. If you found yourself in Sarah's position, feeling trapped, desperate, with no way out, what would you do? Would you see all the options available, or only the most extreme ones? The truth is, emotions alone cannot resolve relationship issues. The more conflicts arise in a relationship, especially when a family is on the verge of falling apart and hope seems lost, the more important it is to stay calm and make rational choices. This story serves as a warning to us all about the tragedies that can unfold when love turns into hatred, when people lose their sense of reason and act purely on impulse. In marriage and relationships, communication is key. If there are problems, talk them out openly and honestly. Don't let misunderstandings and resentment build up to the point where they explode beyond repair. Divorce is not the end of the world. If a marriage is beyond saving, face it with courage and handle it in a civil manner. Divorce is not a final chapter, but an opportunity to start anew. And most importantly, never resort to violence to solve a problem. Violence is never the answer. It only leads to suffering, loss, and irreversible consequences. I've stood in too many blood-spattered rooms, seen too many bodies, witnessed too much grief. The saddest part is how often it all could have been avoided with better choices, clearer thinking, and the courage to face difficult truths directly instead of trying to eliminate them. If you found value in this story, please share it with loved ones. It might help someone make a better choice in a moment of crisis. And if you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to my channel for more in-depth examinations of complex cases. Remember, the most dangerous wounds are often invisible, the ones in our minds and hearts that drive us to desperate actions. Recognize them in yourself and others before they lead to tragedy. This is Detective Shernan, signing off until the next case.